Welcome back to another journey through the vast reaches of science fiction. Tonight, we're venturing to the desert planet Arrakis to explore the single most valuable substance in the known universe: spice melange, the drug that makes interstellar civilization possible, the commodity that empires rise and fall to control, the narcotic that transforms human consciousness and human bodies in ways both wondrous and terrible. Before we dive into the sands of Dune, if you enjoy these deep explorations of science fiction worlds, hitting that subscribe button really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more content like this. Now, settle in as we unravel the mysteries of the spice that must flow. Picture a substance so valuable that a handful of it could buy you a home on any planet in the Imperium. Imagine a drug so addictive that withdrawal means certain death, yet so beneficial that it triples human lifespan. Envision a narcotic so powerful that it unlocks abilities humans shouldn't possess, allowing them to see through time itself, to perceive past and future as clearly as the present moment. This is spice melange, and it exists in only one place in the entire universe: the desert wastes of Arrakis. A planet so hostile that its very name evokes images of endless dunes, scorching heat, and the constant threat of death by dehydration. Yet for all its dangers, Arrakis has become the most important world in human civilization, not despite its harshness, but because of what that harshness produces. Frank Herbert created spice melange as more than just a plot device or a MacGuffin to drive his narrative forward. The spice is a meditation on dependency, on the relationship between scarcity and power, on how a single resource can shape the destiny of billions. It's Herbert's commentary on oil, on the geopolitics of the 20th century projected onto a galactic scale. But it's also something more primal than that. Spice is transformation. It's evolution compressed into consumable form. It's the promise that humanity can transcend its limitations, paired with the warning that such transcendence comes at a cost that may be too high to pay. The full name, spice melange, comes from an ancient Terran word meaning a mixture of spices. But there's nothing mixed about the substance itself. It's singular, unique, irreplaceable. No laboratory has successfully synthesized it, at least not for thousands of years after its discovery. Every gram of spice that exists has been harvested from the sands of Arrakis, extracted at tremendous risk and expense from a desert that fights to keep its secrets. The Fremen who live on Arrakis call it many things, sometimes simply the spice, sometimes by more reverent names that acknowledge its connection to the giant sandworms they worship. For them, spice isn't just a commodity or a drug. It's woven into their culture, their religion, their very way of life. They breathe it in with every breath, consume it in their food and drink, use it to create everything from paper to explosives. The desert gives them spice, and the spice makes the desert survivable. But for the rest of the Imperium, spice is something else entirely. It's the foundation of an economic system that spans thousands of inhabited worlds. It's the fuel that makes faster-than-light travel possible and safe. It's the secret ingredient in the politics of the Landsraad, the tool by which the Bene Gesserit sisterhood manipulates the bloodlines of humanity toward their own inscrutable goals. Control the spice, and you control the universe. This isn't hyperbole. It's simple fact in the world of Dune. The Padishah Emperor's power rests on his control of Arrakis. The Spacing Guild's monopoly on interstellar travel depends entirely on their access to spice. The great noble houses of the Landsraad scheme and plot for generations to gain even the smallest increase in their spice allocations. And at the center of it all sits Arrakis, producing the substance that everyone needs and no one can do without. Tonight, we're going to explore every facet of this remarkable substance. We'll examine its physical properties, the strange and beautiful way it comes into being through the life cycle of creatures that dwarf any animal Earth has ever known. We'll look at how it's harvested, at the incredible dangers faced by those who venture into the deep desert to collect it. We'll explore what spice does to the human body and mind, from the relatively benign to the utterly transformative. We'll meet the Guild Navigators, humans who have consumed so much spice that they've become something else entirely, barely recognizable as the species they were born into. We'll examine the economics of spice, the vast commercial apparatus built around this single substance, and we'll delve into the water of life, spice's even more potent derivative, and the role it plays in unlocking the most profound human abilities. This is the story of a drug that changed everything, a substance so central to human civilization that its loss would mean the collapse of the Imperium, the end of interstellar travel, and the death by withdrawal of billions of addicts. It's the story of what happens when evolution takes a shortcut, when consciousness expansion becomes a commodity, when the line between human and post-human becomes a choice rather than a distant possibility. The spice must flow. Let's find out why. Chapter 1: The Substance Itself. To understand spice melange, you first need to see it. Herbert himself was deliberately vague about the spice's exact appearance, offering glimpses rather than detailed descriptions. In its gaseous form, spice appears as an orange cloud. When stored in bins, it glows a radiant blue in dim light. Fresh spice deposits where a blow has occurred show up as violet-tinged sand. And there are mentions of dark reddish-brown mounds when discovered in storage. The color seems to shift depending on concentration, state, and lighting. What remains consistent is that cinnamon quality, that warm suggestion of the spice everyone associates with the substance. Based on these varying descriptions, we can infer that spice changes appearance based on how it's processed and contained, making it recognizable more by scent than by a single consistent color. The texture is fine, almost powder-like in its purest form, though it can also appear in small crystalline chunks or larger deposits mixed with desert sand. When you hold it, spice feels warm, as if it retains some memory of the desert heat that helped create it. It has weight to it, a density that surprises anyone handling it for the first time. This isn't some ethereal fairy dust. It's substantial, real, a physical thing with physical properties that can be measured and quantified, even if it can't yet be replicated. But it's the smell that really defines spice melange. Close your eyes and imagine the scent of cinnamon. Not the mild commercial version you find in grocery stores, but wild cinnamon, rich and complex and almost overwhelming. Now add to that a sharp, flinty quality, something mineral and desert dry that speaks of ancient rocks and wind-scoured sand. There's a sweetness underneath, not sugary, but something more fundamental, a sweetness that connects to something deep in human biology, something that recognizes this substance as important, as desirable, as necessary. The smell of spice is intoxicating, even before you consume it. People who spend time around concentrated spice deposits find themselves breathing deeply, unconsciously trying to draw more of that scent into their lungs. It's seductive in a way that bypasses conscious thought and speaks directly to something primal in the human nervous system. The taste is even more remarkable, and it changes depending on how much you've been exposed to the substance. For someone trying spice for the first time, the initial experience is often unpleasant. It's bitter, with a burning quality that makes the tongue and throat feel raw. There's that cinnamon note again, but turned harsh and medicinal rather than comforting. Many first-time users find it difficult to swallow, their bodies instinctively rebelling against something their nervous system recognizes as a powerful drug. But here's where spice gets interesting. There's a phenomenon that some Dune scholars have called the learned flavor reaction. As your body begins to adapt to spice, as it recognizes the benefits the substance provides, the taste changes. What was bitter becomes pleasant. What burned becomes warm. The cinnamon notes that seemed harsh transform into something rich and satisfying. Eventually, for heavy spice users, the taste becomes not just acceptable, but actively craved, something they seek out with the intensity of any addict pursuing their substance of choice. This transformation in perceived taste isn't just psychological. It's a real change in how your body processes the sensory information. Spice awakens parts of the nervous system that normally lie dormant. It enhances perception in ways that extend beyond vision and hearing to include senses humans don't even have names for. When you consume spice regularly, you begin to taste not just the surface flavor, but something deeper. Something that speaks to the substance's connection to the sandworms that produce it, to the ancient desert ecology of Arrakis, to the very fabric of consciousness itself. Advanced spice users claim they can taste time in Melange, can detect hints of past and future woven into its complex flavor profile. Whether this is literal prescience or simply the enhanced pattern recognition that spice grants is a question without a clear answer, but the subjective experience is profound regardless. The chemical composition of spice melange has baffled scientists for thousands of years. It's organic, clearly, a product of biological processes rather than geological ones, but the molecules that make it up follow patterns that don't quite match anything else in known biochemistry. There are compounds present that should be unstable, that should break down immediately upon exposure to oxygen or water, yet they persist unchanged. there are structures at the molecular level that seem to violate basic principles of organic chemistry, arrangements of atoms that shouldn't be possible, yet demonstrably exist. This is part of what makes synthetic spice so difficult to create. You can't just analyze the chemical composition and reproduce it in a laboratory. The substance seems to require the specific conditions of its creation. The interaction of sandtrout excretions with water under intense heat and pressure, exposed to Arrakis's specific blend of atmospheric gases and solar radiation. Every attempt to replicate these conditions artificially has failed, producing at best a crude approximation that lacks most of spice's beneficial properties and often includes dangerous side effects the natural substance doesn't possess. The molecular structure includes elements that shouldn't function as they do. There are proteins that interact with human neurochemistry in ways that seem almost designed, as if spice evolved specifically to interface with human consciousness. But spice predates humanity's arrival on Arrakis by millions of years. The sandworms and sandtrout that produce it have been creating the substance for eons, long before humans ever left their original world. So how did it come to be so perfectly suited to human neurology? Is it simply an accident of chemistry? A fortunate coincidence that a waste product of one alien species' life cycle happens to be the most valuable drug imaginable for another species? Or is there something more fundamental at work? Some principle of consciousness and biochemistry that transcends individual species? These questions remain unanswered, adding to the mystery and allure of the substance. What we do know is that spice melange is what's called an awareness spectrum narcotic. That's a fancy way of saying it affects consciousness itself, not just mood or perception, but the fundamental way awareness operates. It doesn't just make you feel different, it makes you be different, at least temporarily. It expands the boundaries of what you can perceive and process, pushes your consciousness into territories normally inaccessible to human minds. For most users, this expansion is subtle, a slight enhancement of intuition, a bit more clarity in thinking, a sense of being more present and awake. But for some people, particularly those with the right genetic makeup and training, spice can unlock abilities that border on the supernatural. Prescience, the ability to see possible futures. Enhanced memory that allows access to genetic information passed down through generations. Heightened physical control that permits impossible feats of strength and coordination. These aren't metaphors or exaggerations. In the world of Dune, these abilities are real, and spice is the key that unlocks them. The substance also has profound effects on human metabolism and cellular function. Regular spice consumption slows the aging process dramatically. Where an unenhanced human might live 70 or 80 years, a heavy spice user can live for 200 years or more, sometimes even tripling their natural lifespan. They don't just live longer either. They remain vital and healthy deep into what would normally be advanced old age. A spice-saturated human of 150 might have the body and mind of someone in their 30s or 40s, still strong, still sharp, still fully engaged with life. This geriatric property alone would make spice valuable, but it's almost a side effect compared to the consciousness-expanding properties that define the substance. The darkness in all this is the addiction. Spice melange is physically and psychologically addictive in ways that make most earth drugs look benign by comparison. Start taking it regularly, and within months your body will have adapted to its presence, will have restructured its metabolism around the assumption that spice will continue to be available. Stop taking it, and withdrawal begins immediately. Not the uncomfortable but survivable withdrawal of most narcotics. Lethal withdrawal. Without spice, a long-term user's body simply stops functioning correctly. Neural pathways that have been enhanced begin to break down. Cellular processes that depend on spice chemistry fail. Within days or at most weeks of complete withdrawal, an addict dies, their body unable to maintain the enhanced state it's grown accustomed to. This makes spice the ultimate form of control. Get someone hooked, and you own them for the rest of their life. They'll do anything, pay anything, sacrifice anything to maintain their supply. And on a civilizational scale, this creates an unbreakable dependency. Billions of people throughout the Imperium use spice regularly. If the supply were to be cut off, if Arrakis stopped producing for any reason, the death toll would be catastrophic beyond comprehension. This is the substance at the center of Dune's universe. Beautiful and terrible, miraculous and dangerous, the source of transcendence and the foundation of the most sophisticated form of slavery ever devised. Spice melange. Now let's explore where it comes from. Chapter 2. Creation in the Deep Desert. The story of spice begins with creatures so immense they challenge human comprehension. The sandworms of Arrakis, known to the Fremen as Shai-Hulud, or sometimes simply the Makers, are the largest organisms ever discovered. Mature specimens can reach lengths of 400 meters or more, as long as some of Earth's tallest skyscrapers laid on their side. Their bodies are segmented like terrestrial annelids, covered in thick, armor-like scales that can withstand the abrasive action of sand moving at high velocity. They have no eyes, navigating instead through sensitivity to vibration, able to detect the rhythmic footsteps of a human from kilometers away. Their mouths are enormous caverns lined with crystalline teeth, capable of swallowing a spice harvester whole, which they do with alarming regularity. But these magnificent giants begin life as something much smaller. The sandworm life cycle starts with sand plankton, microscopic organisms that feed on traces of spice scattered across the desert. These tiny creatures are so small they're invisible to the naked eye, floating on the wind or drifting through the upper layers of sand. As they feed and grow, they undergo their first metamorphosis, transforming into sandtrout. The sandtrout stage is critical to understanding spice production, so let's examine it in detail. Sandtrout are flat, leathery creatures, roughly diamond-shaped and ranging in size from a few centimeters to half a meter across. They have no distinct head or extremities, no eyes, just a surface covered with coarse cilia that help them move through sand. What makes sandtrout remarkable, what makes them essential to Arrakis's ecology, is their relationship with water. They're drawn to it with unerring accuracy, able to detect even tiny quantities from great distances. When sandtrout encounter water, they don't consume it. They insist it, wrapping around it, sealing it away from the desert environment. Multiple sandtrout will link together edge to edge, forming living cisterns deep beneath the sand. Pockets of water trapped inside barriers of living tissue. This is how Arrakis became and remains a desert world. The sandtrout population actively sequesters any available water, preventing it from reaching the surface, maintaining the dry conditions necessary for their own survival and eventual transformation into sandworms. But water isn't just something sandtrout isolate and protect. It's also a trigger for the chemical process that creates spice. The sandtrout secrete a substance, a kind of fungal excretion, that when mixed with water begins a remarkable transformation. Deep beneath the desert surface, in those sealed pockets where water has been encysted, the sandtrout secretions mix with the trapped liquid. What forms is called a pre-spice mass, a stage of fungusoid wild growth that builds pressure as it produces gases. Think of it like fermentation, but on a massive scale and with far more volatile chemistry. The pre-spice mass grows larger and larger in its underground chamber, the pressure building to tremendous levels. The surrounding sandtrout, the ones that formed the living cistern, are crushed by this pressure. Most of them die in what comes next. Eventually, the pressure becomes too great for the surrounding rock and sand to contain. The pre-spice mass explodes upward in what's called a spice blow. If you've ever seen footage of a geyser erupting or a mud volcano, imagine that, but on a scale measured in square kilometers. The pre-spice mass erupts onto the desert surface with tremendous violence, killing anything unfortunate enough to be nearby. The explosion can reach heights of several hundred meters, sending material flying in all directions. Where it lands, the desert surface is transformed, covered in a layer of the violet-tinged pre-spice mass. This is where the true alchemy happens. Exposed to the intense sunlight of Arrakis, to the dry air and the specific chemical composition of the planet's atmosphere, the pre-spice mass undergoes its final transformation. The fungusoid substance reacts with oxygen and solar radiation, its complex chemistry shifting into new configurations. What was toxic becomes beneficial. What was unstable becomes relatively stable. The transformation takes hours or days depending on conditions, but when it's complete, what remains is spice melange, ready to be harvested. the most valuable substance in the universe, created from the death of sandworm larvae and the interaction of their secretions with the harsh desert environment. The sandtrout that survived the spice blow, the ones that weren't crushed by the pressure or killed in the explosion, undergo their own transformation. A few of them, influenced by the chemicals in the pre-spice mass, begin to change. They grow larger, developing internal structures that will eventually become the segmented body of a sandworm. This metamorphosis takes time, sometimes years, but eventually a juvenile sandworm emerges, a creature already several meters long and growing rapidly. As it matures, it begins to feed on the sand itself, processing the minerals and the sand plankton that form the base of Arrakis's food web. The sandworm grows throughout its life, potentially for hundreds or even thousands of years, becoming one of those titanic specimens that dominate the deep desert. When a sandworm eventually dies, whether from age, injury, or deliberate killing, its body decomposes and the sandtrout within it are released. Because mature sandworms are essentially mobile colonies, containing within their massive bodies thousands or even millions of sandtrout in various stages of development. When the worm dies, these sandtrout escape into the surrounding sand, beginning the cycle anew. They seek out water, form living cisterns, secrete their fungal compounds, create new pre-spice masses, produce new spice blows. The cycle perpetuates itself as long as conditions remain suitable, which on Arrakis means as long as the desert remains a desert, as long as water stays scarce enough for sandtrout to control it, but present enough for the chemical reactions to occur. This is why spice can only be found on Arrakis. It's not just that the sandworms live nowhere else, though that's true. It's that the entire ecosystem, the specific conditions of desert, sandtrout, water chemistry, atmospheric composition, and solar radiation, exists nowhere else. You could transport sandworms to another planet, and they might survive there if conditions were right, but they wouldn't produce spice, or they'd produce something different, something that lacked the precise combination of properties that makes melange what it is. The substance is inseparable from its place of origin, a product of Arrakis as surely as the sandworms themselves. The Fremen understand this better than anyone. They've lived alongside the sandworms for thousands of years, have made them central to their religion and culture. They call them the Makers, not just because they're large and impressive, but because they literally make the spice. Because the worms are the source of the substance that makes life on Arrakis possible for humans. Without spice, the Fremen would have no way to achieve the enhanced awareness that allows them to survive in the deep desert, no way to access the prescience that guides their decision-making, no material to create the spice paper and spice fiber and spice explosives that form the basis of their technology. The sandworms give the spice, and the spice gives life. It's a relationship of mutual dependence, though the worms themselves are unaware of and unconcerned with the humans who depend on them. They're too alien, too vast, too other to care about the tiny creatures that harvest what they produce. They simply exist, moving through the sand, maintaining the desert ecology that has existed for millions of years before humans ever arrived. And that ecology is more fragile than it appears. The sandworms require specific conditions to thrive. Too much water, and the sandtrout can't control it, can't form their cisterns, can't trigger the chemical reactions that produce spice. The planet would become wetter, more hospitable to human life perhaps, but the sandworms would die out, and with them the spice. It's a constant balance, one that various powers throughout Dune's history have considered upsetting for their own purposes. The knowledge exists to terraform Arrakis, to bring water to the surface, to create a green and living world from the desert wastes. But doing so would mean the end of spice production, the collapse of the Imperium, the death of billions of addicts. The ecological and political implications are so profound that even considering such a transformation becomes a revolutionary act. This is the miracle and the curse of spice production. It arises from one of the most hostile environments imaginable, created by creatures that would kill any human who got too close, through a process that involves violent explosions and toxic chemicals. Yet from this chaos and danger comes the substance that makes civilization possible, that allows humans to transcend their limitations and reach for something greater. The spice must flow, but the flow is never guaranteed, never safe, always balanced on the edge of catastrophe. One change to the delicate ecology of Arrakis, and it could all end. Chapter 3. The Harvest. Understanding how spice is created is one thing. Actually collecting it from the desert surface is another challenge entirely. One that has claimed countless lives over the centuries of spice harvesting. The basic problem is simple. Spice appears on the desert surface following a spice blow, concentrated in fields that might cover several square kilometers. You need to collect it before the wind scatters it or buries it under new sand. But the very act of harvesting attracts the sandworms that live beneath the desert. And those worms will destroy anything on the surface that generates the rhythmic vibrations they associate with prey or threats. It's a race against time and geology, with death as the penalty for failure. The industrial approach to spice harvesting involves three main pieces of equipment. First, the harvester itself, a massive vehicle that looks like a factory crossed with a vacuum cleaner, with enormous treads or suspensors to keep it from sinking into the sand. The harvester moves across a spice field, its intake systems sucking up sand and spice together, internal mechanisms separating the valuable melange from the worthless desert material. A good harvester can process hundreds of tons of material per hour, extracting pure spice at a rate that makes the enormous expense of the equipment worthwhile, at least when everything goes right. But harvesters are loud. The machinery generates tremendous vibration. the treads or suspensors beating a rhythm into the sand that can be detected by sandworms from dozens of kilometers away. And sandworms, territorial and aggressive by nature, will come to investigate any such disturbance in their domain. When a worm comes, it comes fast, burrowing through sand at speeds approaching 50 kilometers per hour, creating a wave in the desert surface visible from miles away if you know what to look for. The worm doesn't distinguish between natural phenomena and human machinery. It simply knows something is disturbing its territory, and it responds with overwhelming force, breaching to the surface and attacking whatever it finds there. A sandworm can swallow a harvester whole, the entire multi-ton vehicle disappearing down its gullet in seconds. This is where the second piece of equipment becomes essential: the spotter. These can be ornithopters, aircraft that fly on flapping wings and can hover above the harvesting operation, or ground-based observation posts equipped with seismic sensors that detect the characteristic vibration pattern of an approaching sandworm. Spotters watch for what's called worm sign, the telltale signs that a worm is coming. A wave moving through the sand in a straight line, approaching at speed. Birds or other desert creatures fleeing the area. Changes in the resonance patterns detected by seismic monitors. When worm sign appears, the spotters have only minutes to react. That's when the third piece of equipment comes into play: the carryall. These are heavy lift aircraft, essentially flying cranes, powerful enough to lift a fully loaded harvester. When worm sign is spotted, a carryall rushes to the harvester's location, deploys its lift cables, hooks onto the harvester, and attempts to pull it clear before the worm arrives. Success means the harvester, its crew, and its cargo of spice all survive to harvest another day. The carryall flies the harvester to a rock outcropping or other solid ground where vibration won't attract worms. The spice is offloaded into storage, and the whole operation can begin again at a new spice field. Failure means the loss of the harvester, potentially the carryall if it gets too close, and the deaths of anyone who can't evacuate in time. The economics of spice harvesting revolve around this constant tension between harvest speed and safety. Leave a harvester in place longer, and you collect more spice, increasing profits. But each additional minute increases the chance that a worm will arrive, potentially destroying your expensive equipment. Deploying multiple harvesters to the same spice field increases yield, but also increases the vibration signature, drawing worms faster. Using older, cheaper harvesters reduces your capital risk, but they break down more often and process spice more slowly, reducing efficiency. Every decision is a calculated gamble, with fortunes won or lost based on how well you balance aggression and caution. The major houses that control spice harvesting, first the Harkonnens and later the Atreides, approach this challenge differently. The Harkonnens, brutal and focused on short-term profits, push their equipment and crews to the limit. They'll leave a harvester in place until the last possible moment, squeezing out every gram of spice, even if it means regular losses of harvesters and crews. They view workers as expendable and equipment as replaceable, as long as the spice quotas are met. Their operations are efficient in purely economic terms, maximizing output per unit of time. But the human cost is enormous. Crews working for the Harkonnens know they're valued less than the machinery they operate, that if it comes down to saving them or saving the spice they've collected, the spice will be prioritized. The Atreides bring a different philosophy when they take control of Arrakis. Duke Leto Atreides values his people's lives, trains them properly, equips them well, and evacuates harvesters at the first sign of worm sign, rather than pushing for that extra few minutes of harvest time. His approach reduces per-operation yield, but dramatically cuts losses of equipment and personnel. Over time, this creates a more sustainable operation, with experienced crews who know they're valued, leading to better morale and ultimately better productivity. But it also makes the Atreides appear soft to observers accustomed to the Harkonnen approach, seeming to waste potential profits on sentiment. But the large-scale industrial approach isn't the only way spice is harvested. The Fremen have developed their own methods, adapted to their intimate knowledge of the desert and their relationship with the sandworms. Fremen harvesting is a much smaller scale operation, done manually by teams who venture into the deep desert during times when worm activity is lower. They know how to walk without rhythm, placing their feet carefully to minimize vibration, or they use devices called thumpers, rhythmic pounders that generate a specific vibration pattern that attracts worms to a particular location, drawing them away from the area where harvesting is taking place. A properly placed thumper can keep a worm occupied for the hour or two needed for a small team to collect several bags of spice by hand. The Fremen don't have harvesters and carryalls. They don't need them. What they have is knowledge. Thousands of years of accumulated wisdom about sandworm behavior, about when and where spice blows occur, about how to move in the desert without attracting attention. They harvest smaller quantities than the industrial operations, but they can access areas that machinery can't reach, can work during conditions that would force the big operations to halt. And they never lose people to sandworm attacks because they know how to avoid, or when necessary, ride the worms themselves. That's right. The Fremen have developed techniques for mounting sandworms, using maker hooks to pry open segments of the worm's protective scales, forcing it to the surface, and then riding on its back as it travels across the desert at tremendous speed. It's dangerous, requiring skill and courage beyond what most off-worlders can imagine. But it gives the Fremen a mobility and intimacy with the desert that no amount of technology can match. The Fremen also engage in what the authorities would call smuggling, but what they view as their right. They harvest spice from the deep desert, areas nominally under the control of whichever house holds the imperial fief to Arrakis, but which no off-worlder can effectively patrol. They sell this spice to smugglers who operate outside the official CHOAM channels, bypassing the imperial taxes and regulations that govern legal spice trade. This black market in spice is substantial, maybe 10 or 15% of total production, flowing through unofficial networks that have existed for centuries. The authorities know it happens, but there's little they can do to stop it without venturing deep into Fremen territory, which is generally considered too dangerous to be worth the effort. The harvest is also threatened by environmental factors beyond just sandworms. Arrakis experiences tremendous storms, wind events that can last for days or weeks, with sand driven at velocities high enough to scour the protective plating off a harvester, to strip the wings off an ornithopter, to kill an exposed human in minutes. These storms, called Coriolis storms after their spiral structure, can cover thousands of square kilometers, making all harvesting operations impossible across vast swaths of the desert. When a big storm is detected forming, everything has to be secured or evacuated. Operations shut down until it passes. The lost production time cuts into profit margins and makes meeting spice quotas more difficult. Then there's the matter of false spice blows, pre-spice masses that appear to be ready to harvest, but turn out to still be in the unstable pre-transformation phase. Landing a harvester on one of these can be catastrophic. The machinery's vibration can trigger a premature explosion, destroying the harvester and killing its crew. Learning to distinguish true spice fields from false ones is a skill that takes years to develop, and even experienced spotters make mistakes sometimes, with fatal consequences. Despite all these dangers and difficulties, the harvesting continues, day and night, year after year, because the demand for spice never stops, and the profits are too enormous to ignore. A single successful harvest operation, one good spice field exploited effectively, can generate profits measured in the hundreds of millions of Solaris, the imperial currency. Over the course of a year, total spice production represents an economic value greater than entire planetary economies. Control of spice harvesting on Arrakis is quite literally the most valuable business operation in the known universe. And underlying it all is the awareness that the system is inherently unstable. The sandworms could potentially be driven extinct if harvesting becomes too aggressive, if too many of them are killed or driven from their territories. The desert ecology could be disrupted in ways that reduce spice production or eliminate it entirely. The Fremen, tired of seeing their world exploited by off-worlders, could organize and resist, cutting off access to the deep desert where the best spice fields are found. Any of these scenarios could reduce or eliminate spice production, triggering a crisis that would shake the Imperium to its foundations. The harvest must continue, but it can never be taken for granted. Every shipment of spice that leaves Arrakis represents not just economic value, but the continuation of a civilization balanced on the edge of a knife. Chapter 4. What spice does to you. Now let's talk about what happens when spice enters the human body, starting with the most common and mildest effects, and working our way toward the profound transformations that define the substance's most important applications. For the average citizen of the Imperium, someone who might consume small amounts of spice occasionally as a luxury or receive it as medication, the effects are noticeable but not life-changing. There's a mild euphoria, a sense of well-being and contentment that washes over you shortly after ingestion. Colors seem slightly more vivid, sounds more clear. your thoughts flow more easily, making connections between ideas that might not have occurred to you otherwise. It's pleasant without being overwhelming, consciousness expanding in subtle ways that enhance daily life without fundamentally altering it. But even at these low doses, changes are occurring at the cellular level. Spice molecules interact with human DNA in ways that activate normally dormant repair mechanisms. Your cells begin to maintain themselves more effectively, replacing damaged components more efficiently, resisting the accumulated errors that normally lead to aging. This is why spice extends lifespan. It's not that it makes you immortal, or even slows the passage of time as you experience it. It's that it allows your body to maintain itself in a more youthful state for longer, postponing the decline that normally begins in middle age. Someone who consumes spice regularly from their 20s onward might reach 150 with the body and mind of someone half that age, still vital, still engaged, still fully capable of living actively, rather than merely surviving into old age. The mental effects become more pronounced with regular use. Spice enhances what's called awareness, a term that encompasses several related cognitive improvements. Memory becomes more accessible, not just recent events, but things from years or decades past, surfacing with crystalline clarity when needed. Pattern recognition improves, allowing you to see connections and relationships in complex data that you might have missed otherwise. Intuition sharpens, that sense of knowing something without being able to articulate exactly how you know it. Some researchers believe this enhanced intuition is actually a very mild form of prescience, the ability to sense the most likely futures based on subtle cues your enhanced mind picks up, but your conscious awareness doesn't fully process. For people who use spice heavily and consistently, the effects go much deeper. One of the most visible signs of long-term spice saturation is the Eyes of Ibad. After months or years of constant exposure to high concentrations of spice, the whites of the eyes begin to change color, taking on that distinctive blue within blue appearance that marks someone as deeply immersed in spice culture. It's caused by deposits of melange in the eye tissues, accumulating in the sclera until the entire visible eye becomes a deep, startling blue with no white remaining. For the Fremen who are exposed to spice from birth, breathing it in the air of their sietches, consuming it in every meal, the Eyes of Ibad are universal. Every adult Fremen has them, and so do most of their children by the time they reach adolescence. It's a mark of belonging, a sign that you're truly of the desert, rather than just visiting it. The Eyes of Ibad don't impair vision. In fact, many users report that their sight actually improves, becoming sharper and more sensitive, particularly in low light conditions. But they do mark you permanently as a spice user, advertising your addiction to anyone who sees you. For the Fremen, this isn't a concern. For off-worlders who've become too dependent on spice, it can be a source of shame or a vulnerability, making it impossible to hide their addiction from potential enemies or exploiters. But the most profound effects of spice occur in those rare individuals who have the genetic potential and training to unlock its full consciousness-expanding properties. The Bene Gesserit Sisterhood has spent thousands of years identifying and breeding for these genetic markers, creating bloodlines that can withstand and utilize the higher levels of awareness that spice can grant. When someone with this potential consumes enough spice, particularly in the concentrated form known as the water of life, things happen that go beyond simple enhancement of existing faculties. New abilities emerge, capacities that normal humans simply don't possess. The most important of these is prescience, the ability to see through time itself. This isn't prophecy in the mystical sense, some voice from beyond telling you what will happen. It's direct perception of the causal web that connects present to future, the ability to trace the ripples of current actions forward through time and see where they lead. A prescient individual doesn't see one single fixed future. They see a constantly shifting landscape of possibilities, thousands or millions of potential futures branching from each decision point, each one with its own probability and implications. The skill lies in identifying which futures are most likely, which actions in the present will lead to desired outcomes, which threads of possibility to follow, and which to avoid. Paul Atreides, later known as Muad'Dib, is the most famous example of spice-induced prescience taken to its ultimate extreme. Born with the genetic potential carefully bred by the Bene Gesserit, trained from childhood in techniques of mental discipline and awareness, exposed to spice from his arrival on Arrakis, and then consuming the water of life in a massive, transformative dose, Paul's prescience reaches levels that border on omniscience. He sees possible futures stretching thousands of years ahead, perceives the vast forces of history and how they might be guided or diverted. But this gift is also a curse. Paul sees the terrible futures his actions might unleash, the jihad that will spread across the galaxy in his name, killing billions. Yet he also sees that these awful futures are among the least terrible options available, that worse fates await if he chooses differently. Prescience traps him in a kind of predetermined path, where his knowledge of what's coming makes it impossible for him to choose alternatives, because he knows those alternatives lead to even worse outcomes. The other major effect of high-level spice use is access to what the Bene Gesserit call other memory. Human genetic material contains information, the accumulated experiences of all your ancestors encoded in your DNA. Normally, this information is inaccessible, locked away at a level far below consciousness. But spice, particularly when combined with Bene Gesserit mental training, can unlock it. A reverend mother of the Bene Gesserit who has survived the spice agony, the ritual consumption of the water of life, gains access to the memories of all her female ancestors, thousands of individuals stretching back through history. She can consult them, draw on their knowledge and experience, effectively containing within her single consciousness the wisdom of countless lifetimes. This other memory is both resource and burden. Having access to all those perspectives, all that accumulated experience, can provide solutions to problems that would stump someone limited to their own lifetime of knowledge. But it also means you're never truly alone in your own head. The memories of your ancestors are always there, sometimes demanding attention, sometimes offering unwanted commentary. For some individuals, particularly those without the mental discipline to control the experience, other memory can lead to what's called abomination, where the memories overwhelm the present personality, where one of the ancestral egos takes control, essentially possessing the descendant's body. It's a fate the Bene Gesserit fear more than death, the loss of self to the accumulated weight of the past. Spice also enhances physical capabilities in ways that are less dramatic than prescience or other memory, but still significant. Reaction times improve, sometimes doubling or tripling normal human reflexes. Fine motor control becomes precise to the point of seeming superhuman. The Bene Gesserit and their male counterparts trained in combat disciplines can perform feats that look impossible, moving so fast they blur, striking with such precision they can target individual nerve clusters, all because spice allows their nervous systems to operate at peak efficiency. The Fremen, saturated with spice from birth and hardened by life in the deep desert, become warriors whose speed and ferocity are legendary. An average Fremen fighter, trained in their traditional combat style and enhanced by lifelong spice exposure, can defeat multiple normal soldiers without difficulty. But with all these benefits comes the addiction, absolute and inescapable. Your first exposure to spice begins the process, your body recognizing the substance as beneficial, beginning to adjust its chemistry to accommodate and utilize it. Continue using it regularly, and within months, those adjustments become permanent. Your metabolism restructures itself around the assumption of continued spice availability. Neural pathways enhanced by spice become dependent on it to maintain their enhanced state. Cellular repair mechanisms that spice activated don't just slow down without it. They fail entirely. Stop taking spice after you're fully addicted, and your body begins to break down, rapidly and catastrophically. The withdrawal process is agonizing, both physically and mentally. The enhanced clarity that spice provided disappears, leaving you feeling dulled and confused. The improved health and vitality fade, replaced by weakness and pain as your body struggles to function without the substance it's come to require. Memory becomes unreliable, time sense distorted. If the addiction is advanced enough, if you've been using heavily for years or decades, withdrawal will kill you within days or weeks. Your system simply unable to maintain itself without the chemical support it's grown dependent on. There is no cure for spice addiction, no way to safely wean someone off the substance once they're fully hooked. You either maintain your supply for the rest of your extended life, or you die. That's the choice, stark and absolute. This makes spice the ultimate tool of control on both personal and civilizational scales. Get someone addicted and you own them. They'll do anything to maintain their supply, compromise any principle, betray any trust, cut off someone's spice access, and you condemn them to death as surely as if you'd put a knife in them, just slower and more painful. On the larger scale, the fact that billions of people throughout the Imperium are spice addicts means that whoever controls spice production effectively controls the loyalty of the entire civilized galaxy. It's why the Emperor's power rests so heavily on his control of Arrakis, why the great houses scheme so desperately for even minor increases in their spice allotments. It's not just about wealth, though the economic value is staggering. It's about power in its most fundamental form, the power of life and death over entire populations who depend on the substance you control. The Fremen, interestingly, don't see their spice addiction as a curse or a form of control. For them, it's part of their identity, a connection to the desert that defines them. They're born into spice saturation, grow up with the Eyes of Ibad, never know a moment of their lives when melange wasn't present in their bodies. They view off-worlders who use spice cautiously or intermittently with a mixture of pity and contempt. To truly understand the desert, to truly be of Arrakis, you must surrender to the spice completely, must allow it to transform you fully, rather than trying to maintain some imaginary separation. Their addiction is total, but it's also chosen, embraced as part of what makes them who they are. Chapter 5: The Guild Navigators. Now we come to perhaps the most extreme transformation that spice makes possible: the metamorphosis of Guild Navigators. To understand what navigators are and why they're necessary, we need to talk about space travel in the Dune universe. Faster-than-light travel exists, achieved through what's called a Holtzman drive that folds space, allowing a ship to travel vast distances instantaneously. But there's a problem with this technology. You can't calculate a safe path through folded space using conventional computers. The variables are too complex, the mathematics too involved, the real-time adjustments required too rapid for any mechanical system to handle. Ships equipped with computers to navigate through folded space have a tendency to arrive at their destination having passed through the center of a star, or materialized inside a planet, or simply never arrived anywhere at all, lost in the mathematical chaos of folded space. Humanity solved this problem in two ways. First, they banned thinking machines, computers sophisticated enough to handle complex calculations. This ban, rooted in humanity's history with artificial intelligence and resulting in what's called the Butlerian Jihad, made mechanical navigation impossible by law and tradition. Second, they turned to the Spacing Guild, an organization that had discovered human minds enhanced by massive doses of spice could perform the calculations necessary for safe space travel. Not just any human mind, and not with any amount of spice. It required specific genetic characteristics combined with training and exposure to melange at concentrations that would kill most people. But for those rare individuals who could survive the process, the result was a navigator, a human transformed into something that could perceive the mathematics of space and time directly, could plot courses through folded space with perfect accuracy. The transformation into a navigator is gradual and irreversible. It begins with immersion in spice gas, melange in its most concentrated form, vaporized and maintained at high concentration in specialized chambers. The proto-navigator breathes nothing but spice, lives in an atmosphere saturated with it, their body absorbing incredible quantities of the drug through lungs, skin, and every mucous membrane. The initial exposure is dangerous, potentially fatal. Many candidates die in the first days or weeks, their bodies unable to handle the massive doses, their organs shutting down under the chemical assault. But those who survive begin to change. The first changes are mental. Consciousness expands rapidly, far beyond what even advanced Bene Gesserit training can achieve. The navigator begins to perceive things that normal humans can't sense, developing what appears to be an ability to see through the mathematical structures of fold space. This expanded awareness allows them to understand space travel in a way that makes navigation possible. They can perceive the safe paths through what would otherwise be chaos, can calculate in real time the adjustments needed to keep a ship on course as it traverses distances that would take years at sublight speeds. But the mental transformation is accompanied by physical changes that are far more disturbing. The navigator's body, subjected to such enormous concentrations of spice combined with living in zero-gravity environments, begins to mutate. In Dune Messiah, we get our first detailed description of a late-stage navigator named Edric. He's described as an elongated figure, vaguely humanoid, with finned feet and hugely fanned membranous hands, like a fish in a strange sea. Later descriptions note that navigators have a tiny V-shaped mouth, an ugly flap of nose, and gigantic faces with pulsing temples. Their heads enlarge, their limbs elongate and reposition, and their extremities develop webbing. The entire body atrophies from the constant immersion in zero gravity, giving them an emaciated appearance despite their enlarged heads. Navigators lose the ability to survive in normal atmospheric conditions. Their transformed bodies require the spice-saturated environment they've adapted to. These tanks are filled with orange spice gas, maintained at precise concentrations. Exposure to normal air would be fatal. The tanks themselves are often described as rectangular containers where the navigator floats or swims, forever bathed in the orange vapors that both sustain and further transform them. Their mutated voices can no longer form recognizable speech, requiring translation devices to communicate, producing what's described as sing-song ululations that machines must convert into understandable language. The psychological effects of becoming a navigator are equally profound. The expanded consciousness that allows navigation also seems to distance the navigator from normal human concerns and emotions. When you perceive space and time in ways that allow you to navigate through fold space, when you exist perpetually immersed in prescient awareness, human relationships and motivations might become difficult to relate to. Based on their described behavior, navigators appear to become cold, calculating beings focused entirely on their function. They retain human intelligence and agency, but they exist so far removed from the baseline human experience that communication becomes challenging. The Spacing Guild protects its navigators carefully, both physically and politically. Navigator tanks are heavily armored and shielded, preventing anyone from attacking or threatening the beings inside. The Guild maintains strict control over who becomes a navigator and how they're trained, ensuring that the organization maintains its monopoly on space travel. And the Guild is scrupulous about political neutrality, refusing to take sides in the conflicts that rage among the great houses and between houses and the Emperor. The Guild will transport anyone who can pay their fees, will carry troops and weapons and supplies for any faction, but will never favor one side over another through preferential service or intelligent sharing. This neutrality is both practical and necessary. The Guild's power rests on being indispensable to everyone, on being the only entity that can provide safe, reliable, faster-than-light travel. If they showed favoritism, if they used their position to advantage certain parties, they would immediately become targets for alliances of threatened parties. The combined forces of the Landsraad could potentially destroy the Guild if they united against it, disrupting interstellar civilization, but ending the Guild's monopoly. By remaining scrupulously neutral, by treating Emperor and Minor House alike as simply customers to be served, the Guild ensures its own survival and the continuation of the profits that flow from their unique service. But this neutrality has its costs. The Guild Navigators see the currents of politics and history unfolding across the Imperium, can perceive through their prescient abilities where conflicts are heading and what outcomes are likely. Yet they remain silent, offering no warnings, no guidance, no intervention. They transport the troops that will commit atrocities, carry the weapons that will destroy planets, facilitate the schemes that will plunge entire sectors into war, all without comment or concern. Their morality, if it can still be called that, has become purely functional. What matters is the continuation of space travel, the flow of commerce, the stability of the system that requires their services. Individual lives, even billions of them, are irrelevant details in a larger pattern they perceive. The transformation into a navigator appears to be gradual rather than instantaneous, though the exact process and timeline aren't fully detailed in Herbert's original novels. Based on what we know from the extended Dune universe, candidates undergo training and increasing exposure to spice, with their bodies changing over months or years as saturation increases. Some accounts suggest the Guild even breeds humans specifically for navigator potential, selecting for genetic traits that make the transformation more successful. The voluntary nature of this choice becomes questionable when considering the limited options many candidates face. The Guild maintains that they have sufficient navigators to staff every ship that requires their services, with reserves in training. The exact numbers and attrition rates remain closely guarded secrets. The Guild's constant recruitment suggests significant losses over time, though whether from the physical strain of navigation, the isolation of their existence, or simply the long-term effects of such massive spice exposure remains unclear. There are hints in Herbert's later novels about navigator stages, suggesting a progression of transformation over time. Early-stage navigators might still appear relatively human, requiring only contact lenses to hide their blue-within-blue eyes. Late-stage navigators like Edric have undergone the full transformation into something barely recognizable as human. Whether there exist even higher stages of transformation remains a matter of speculation based on limited textual evidence. What is certain is that without navigators, interstellar civilization would collapse. Every ship that travels between stars depends on a navigator to guide it safely through fold space. Trade, communication, military operations, all would become impossible without the Guild's services. This dependence makes the navigators among the most functionally important people in the Imperium, even if most citizens never see one and barely understand what they do. The navigators represent both the ultimate potential of what spice can unlock in human consciousness and a sobering warning about the physical and psychological price of such transformation. Chapter 6: The Economics of the Universe. To understand the true significance of spice melange, you need to understand the economic system built around it. At the center of this system sits CHOAM, the Combine Hanete Ober Advancer Mercantiles, which sounds like a mouthful, but essentially means the combined commercial organization that controls most trade in the Imperium. CHOAM is structured as a company owned by shares held by the Great Houses, the Spacing Guild, and the Padishah Emperor. The Emperor is the largest single shareholder, but he doesn't have majority control. The Great Houses collectively own enough shares to check imperial power, while the Guild's holdings give them significant influence over any major decisions. It's a system designed to balance competing interests, to prevent any single faction from gaining absolute economic control. CHOAM regulates or directly controls trade in most valuable commodities, but their most important function by far is managing the spice trade. They set official prices for melange, allocate harvesting rights on Arrakis, collect taxes on spice transactions, and punish those who attempt to operate outside the official system. The Emperor, As both the largest CHOAM shareholder and the feudal overlord who grants the fief to Arrakis, has 2 layers of control over spice production. He receives income from his CHOAM shares, benefiting from every gram of spice sold through official channels. And he receives tribute from whichever great house he's granted operational control of Arrakis to, skimming a portion of their profits in exchange for the privilege of harvesting. The actual control of Arrakis gets complicated. The Emperor can't run harvesting operations directly without appearing to monopolize the spice trade, which would unite the great houses against him. So he grants Arrakis as a quasi-fief to one of the major houses, allowing them to harvest spice and sell it through CHOAM in exchange for tribute payments to the imperial house. For several generations before the events of Dune begin, this privilege belonged to House Harkonnen. The Harkonnens run spice operations with brutal efficiency, maximizing short-term profits while paying the required tribute to the Emperor. They become incredibly wealthy from the arrangement, using that wealth to maintain military forces and political influence far beyond what their actual holdings would otherwise support. But the Emperor, Shaddam IV, begins to fear the growing power of House Atreides, particularly Duke Leto Atreides, who has become popular among the other great houses for his fair dealing and military competence. The Emperor decides to destroy the Atreides, but he can't do it directly without appearing tyrannical and risking a general revolt. So he devises a scheme. He transfers the fief to Arrakis from the Harkonnens to the Atreides, ostensibly as a great honor and opportunity for wealth. In reality, it's a trap. The Harkonnens have spent decades building infrastructure and relationships on Arrakis. The Atreides are newcomers who will struggle to maintain production while facing sabotage from Harkonnen agents left behind. The Emperor expects the Atreides to fail, to become vulnerable, at which point he can eliminate them with Harkonnen assistance, restoring control of Arrakis to the Harkonnens and removing a potential threat to his throne. This political maneuvering reveals how much value concentrates in spice control. The fief to Arrakis is worth more than entire planets, more than fleets of ships, more than most houses' total assets. The income from even a few years of spice harvesting can reshape a house's fortunes, elevating them from minor player to major power, or, if mishandled, bankrupting them entirely. Every house in the Landsraad covets the Arrakis fief, but few are strong enough to hold it against the forces arrayed against them, the harsh environment, the Fremen who resist off-world control, and the political attacks from rivals who want the fief for themselves. The official price of spice in the CHOAM system is measured in Solaris, the imperial currency. Herbert provides limited, specific pricing details in the novels, keeping the exact economics somewhat vague while emphasizing that spice represents staggering wealth. What we do know is that even small quantities of pure melange command astronomical prices. Scale that up to the tons harvested daily from Arrakis, and the numbers become almost incomprehensible. Annual spice production generates wealth that dwarfs entire planetary economies, making the Arrakis fief the single most valuable asset in the known universe. But the official CHOAM price isn't the whole story. There's a thriving black market in spice, fed by smuggler operations and illegal Fremen harvesting. Black market spice sells for much higher prices, sometimes double or triple the official rate, because it bypasses CHOAM taxes and regulations. Buyers willing to work outside the official system can access spice without reporting their consumption to authorities, without having their increasing addiction tracked and potentially used against them. The black market also provides spice to people and organizations that CHOAM has cut off for various reasons, allowing even the excommunicated access to the drug that billions depend on. The smuggler operations on Arrakis are sophisticated and long established. They use small, fast ships to avoid Guild oversight, landing in the deep desert where patrols can't reach them, trading with the Fremen for spice that never enters official tallies. The smugglers are tolerated to an extent by whoever controls Arrakis, because fighting them costs more than the lost revenue is worth, and because they serve useful functions, such as disposing of spice that the controlling house wants to move without reporting to the Emperor or CHOAM. It's a gray economy that everyone knows about but no one fully acknowledges, operating in the spaces between official channels. The Spacing Guild's share of the spice economy deserves special attention. The Guild doesn't harvest spice themselves, but they control all interstellar shipping, including the transport of spice from Arrakis to other worlds. This gives them tremendous leverage. They can demand payment in spice rather than Solaris, ensuring their navigators and operations never lack for the substance they absolutely require. They can also threaten to embargo transport for anyone who displeases them, effectively cutting that entity off from interstellar commerce. No one seriously challenges the Guild because no one can function without their services. They're as dependent on spice as everyone else, but their control of transportation means they can always ensure their own supply continues regardless of political changes or economic disruptions. The Bene Gesserit Sisterhood also receives significant spice allocations, both through their connections to various great houses and through their own commercial operations. They need spice for their training programs, for the creation of Reverend Mothers through the spice agony, and for maintaining the enhanced abilities that make them invaluable as advisors, truth-sayers, and power brokers. The Bene Gesserit are less interested in wealth for its own sake than in maintaining their ability to guide human evolution according to their long-term plans. But they understand that influence requires resources, and spice is the ultimate resource in the Imperium's economy. For ordinary citizens of the Imperium, spice is available but expensive. A middle-class person on a developed world might be able to afford occasional spice consumption as a luxury, or use it as medication when seriously ill. The wealthy consume it regularly, accepting addiction as the price of extended life and enhanced awareness. The poor generally can't access it at all, except in medical emergencies, remaining free of addiction, but also missing out on the benefits that regular users enjoy. This creates a kind of chemical class divide, where the rich literally live longer and think more clearly because they can afford the drug that provides these advantages. The political implications of spice economics extend far beyond simple trade. Because so many powerful people are addicted to melange, control of its supply provides leverage over them. Cut off someone's spice access, and you can compel almost any concession. Threaten to reduce a house's spice allocation, and you can influence their political alignment. Promise increased access, and you can buy loyalty that might otherwise be unavailable. Every major political negotiation in the Imperium has an underlying spice component, parties maneuvering not just for direct advantages, but for positions that will secure or improve their access to melange. This is why Paul Atreides, when he gains control of Arrakis and its spice production, becomes effectively the most powerful person in the universe. He can threaten to destroy spice production entirely, to eliminate the sandworms and end melange forever. This would kill him along with everyone else addicted to it, but it would also destroy interstellar civilization, kill billions, reduce humanity to isolated planetary populations with no way to communicate or trade across the void. It's a threat so extreme that it seems incredible, yet Paul's prescience allows him to see that he's capable of carrying it out if pushed far enough. The Emperor, the great houses, even the Spacing Guild must bow to his demands, because the alternative is literally the end of their civilization. Spice has made one man with sufficient will and vision more powerful than all the traditional military and political forces of the Imperium combined. This is the ultimate expression of what spice means economically. It's not just another commodity, not just an unusually valuable trade good. It's the foundation that everything else rests on, the substance without which the entire structure of imperial civilization collapses. Controlling it means controlling everything, and threatening it means threatening everyone. The economics of spice transcend normal market forces and become inseparable from the politics of power itself. Chapter 7: The Water of Life. While spice melange in its standard form is remarkable enough, there exists an even more potent derivative known as the water of life. This substance represents spice at its most concentrated and dangerous, the key to unlocking abilities that even heavy melange use cannot provide. Understanding the water of life requires understanding how it's created and what makes it different from the spice that produces it. The water of life comes from the body of a sandworm, specifically a drowned sandworm. The Fremen discovered long ago that when a small sandworm, usually a juvenile several meters long, is trapped in a quantity of water, it drowns. But the drowning process triggers a chemical reaction within the worm's body. Its internal organs, saturated with spice and the complex chemistry that produces melange, begin to break down in a specific way. The worm's death throes release enzymes and compounds that transform the spice within its system into something new, something far more concentrated and potent than melange found in spice blows. The liquid that results from this process is toxic in its initial form, deadly to anyone who consumes it. But the Fremen, working from knowledge passed down through countless generations, have developed a ritual to transform the poison into something usable. A woman, typically one trained in specific breathing and meditation techniques, consumes a small amount of the toxic liquid and holds it in her body while using focused consciousness to alter its chemistry. This process, called transmutation, changes the molecular structure of the water of life, rendering it safe for consumption and maximizing its consciousness-expanding properties. The woman then spits the transmuted liquid back out, and this becomes the true water of life, ready to be consumed in the ritual known as the spice agony. The transmutation process is extremely dangerous. Most women who attempt it die, their bodies unable to handle the toxic load, or their consciousness insufficiently trained to direct the chemical transformation required. Among the Fremen, certain women specialize in this role, training from youth to develop the mental discipline and physiological resilience necessary. These women, who might be compared to the Bene Gesserit's Reverend Mothers, occupy special positions in Fremen society, respected and somewhat feared for their ability to walk the line between poison and enlightenment. When the Bene Gesserit discovered the water of life, they recognized it as the ultimate test for their training methods. A woman who successfully consumes the water of life and survives the resulting spice agony becomes a Reverend Mother, gaining access to other memory and achieving levels of consciousness control that years of training alone cannot provide. The spice agony is the central ritual of Bene Gesserit initiation, the moment when a sister transcends her individual existence and becomes part of the sisterhood's collective awareness, stretching back through generations. The experience of the spice agony is difficult to describe for those who haven't undergone it. Imagine every cell in your body suddenly awakening, becoming individually conscious and aware. Imagine your mind expanding until it touches the minds of every female ancestor in your lineage. Thousands of individuals suddenly present in your consciousness. Now imagine that this expansion happens all at once. An overwhelming flood of sensation and memory and awareness that threatens to wash away your individual identity entirely. Most who attempt the agony die in these first moments, their consciousness fragmenting under the strain, unable to maintain coherence as the water of life does its work. Those who survive the initial onslaught face a different challenge. They must integrate all the ancestral memories flooding into them, must establish a relationship with these other selves that allows cooperation rather than competition for control. The other memories are not passive recordings, they're personalities, egos that once possessed their own bodies and now find themselves sharing space in a descendant's mind. Some are helpful, some are resentful, some simply confused by their new existence. The newly made Reverend Mother must assert dominance over this internal council, must make clear that while she will listen to their counsel, she remains the primary consciousness, the one who makes final decisions. For men, the spice agony has historically been fatal. The Bene Gesserit theorized that male neurochemistry couldn't handle the transformation, that something about the Y chromosome made the agony invariably lethal for men. They bred for thousands of years toward producing the Kwisatz Haderach, a male who could survive the agony and gain access to both male and female genetic memories, seeing further and more clearly than any reverend mother. Paul Atreides becomes this figure, consuming the water of life and surviving, though the experience nearly kills him. He spends days in a coma-like state, his consciousness adrift in the space between life and death, while his body processes the drug and his mind expands to encompass the memories of all his male ancestors. When Paul emerges from the spice agony, he has become something unprecedented. He possesses the full genetic memory of both his male and female lines, can perceive futures with a clarity that terrifies him, and has achieved a level of consciousness that places him functionally beyond any other human in history. His prescience becomes so powerful that he sees the vast web of causality stretching across space and time, perceives the golden path, the narrow thread of possibilities that might allow humanity to survive the long-term threats it faces. But this knowledge is a burden as much as a gift. Paul sees the jihad that will be fought in his name, the billions who will die, the terrible price that must be paid. He sees that his own existence has become a trap, that the very prescience that allows him to see the best paths forward also locks him into following them, because deviating means accepting outcomes he knows will be worse. The water of life plays a crucial role in Fremen culture, beyond just the creation of reverend mothers. The Fremen conduct communal rituals called spice orgies, where large groups consume water of life together and enter a shared prescient state. These experiences create powerful bonds within the CH community as participants perceive possible futures together and make collective decisions about which paths to follow. The spice orgy isn't about physical pleasure, though the name might suggest that. It's about communion, about merging individual consciousness into something larger, about making decisions that affect the entire community based on shared prescient vision rather than individual preference or political maneuvering. During a spice orgy, the boundaries between individual consciousness become permeable. Participants experience each other's thoughts and feelings, see through each other's memories, become temporarily part of a group mind that encompasses everyone present. This allows for a level of communal understanding and decision-making impossible through normal discussion and debate. When the orgy ends and individual consciousness reasserts itself, participants retain memories of the shared experience, of having been briefly part of something larger than themselves. These memories create bonds of understanding and empathy that hold Fremen society together, despite the harsh conditions they face. The creation of water of life also serves a practical function in Fremen ecology management. By drowning young sandworms to create the substance, the Fremen limit sandworm population growth, preventing the desert from becoming oversaturated with the massive creatures. It's a form of sustainable harvesting, taking only what's needed for ceremonial purposes while ensuring the overall sandworm population remains healthy. The Fremen understand the ecological balance better than any off-worlder, recognizing that their own survival depends on maintaining the desert ecosystem that produces the spice they depend on. For the Bene Gesserit, the water of life represents the pinnacle of their arts, the substance that transforms a well-trained sister into something transcendent. But they also recognize its dangers. Not every sister who attempts the spice agony survives, even among those judged ready for the trial. The sisterhood maintains careful records of genetic lines and training outcomes, trying to identify markers that predict success. But there's always an element of unpredictability. Some sisters who seem perfectly prepared die in the agony, while others who seem marginal candidates survive and thrive. The mystery of why some succeed where others fail remains one of the sisterhood's unsolved questions. The Bene Gesserit also discovered that the water of life can be used for purposes beyond creating reverend mothers. Small, carefully measured doses can enhance certain abilities temporarily, granting brief flashes of prescience or accessing specific genetic memories without triggering the full spice agony. These controlled applications are dangerous and used sparingly, but they provide tools for situations where a sister needs capabilities beyond her normal training. A truthsayer serving in an imperial court might consume a tiny amount of water of life before a crucial meeting, gaining just enough enhanced perception to detect lies and manipulations that would otherwise escape notice. The substance also plays a role in the Bene Gesserit breeding program. By administering minute quantities of water of life to pregnant sisters, the sisterhood can influence fetal development in subtle ways, pushing genetic expression toward desired outcomes. This isn't genetic engineering in the modern sense. The Bene Gesserit lack that technology and couldn't use it if they had it, given the prohibition on thinking machines and associated technologies. But they can work with what they have, using the consciousness-expanding properties of water of life to create a kind of conscious evolution, guiding development through focused will and biochemical manipulation. When Paul's sister Aliyah consumes water of life while still in her mother's womb, the result is unprecedented and disturbing. Aliyah becomes fully conscious while still a fetus, aware and thinking and accumulating memories before she's even born. When she emerges into the world, she's an infant with the mind of an adult, with access to full other memory, with awareness and capabilities that shouldn't exist in such a young body. She's what the Bene Gesserit call an abomination, someone who gained full consciousness before developing the ego strength to resist possession by ancestral memories. Aliyah manages to maintain her individual identity for years, becoming a powerful figure in her own right. But eventually, the memories overwhelm her, and an ancestral personality takes control. She becomes a cautionary tale about the dangers of using water of life carelessly, proof that some transformations should not be forced, especially in those too young to handle them. The creation of synthetic water of life has been attempted many times over the centuries, with results ranging from complete failure to catastrophic disaster. The substance is simply too complex, too dependent on the specific biochemistry of sandworms and the transmutation process performed by trained women to be replicated in laboratory conditions. What can be created artificially are crude approximations that sometimes provide mild prescient abilities, but more often cause madness, cellular breakdown, or immediate death. These failures underscore the unique nature of spice and its derivatives, substances that emerge from a specific ecology and cannot be divorced from that context without losing their essential properties. The water of life represents spice melange taken to its ultimate expression. Consciousness expansion pushed as far as human biology can tolerate, and sometimes beyond that limit. It's the key that unlocks the highest human abilities, but it's also a poison that kills most who dare to use it. In this way, it perfectly embodies the duality of spice itself, miraculous and deadly, transformative and addictive, the source of transcendence and the instrument of control. The water of life is spice distilled to its essence, all its properties concentrated and intensified, all its benefits and dangers magnified to their maximum expression. Chapter 8: The Fremen and the Desert Way. To truly understand spice melange, you must understand the Fremen, because no people in the Imperium have a deeper or more comprehensive relationship with the substance. The Fremen are desert dwellers who have adapted to Arrakis over thousands of years, creating a culture and way of life centered around the harsh realities of their environment. And spice is woven into every aspect of that culture, inseparable from what it means to be Fremen. From birth, Fremen children breathe air saturated with spice. The CHs where they live, vast cave systems carved into rock formations scattered across the desert, trap spice particles in the air. Every breath carries traces of melange into Fremen lungs, beginning the saturation process before consciousness even develops. Fremen food is prepared with spice, meals flavored with melange so that every mouthful contributes to the constant intake. Water, the most precious resource on Arrakis, is stored in cisterns lined with spice fiber materials, so even drinking provides another avenue of exposure. By the time a Fremen child reaches adolescence, they are thoroughly saturated, their body chemistry adapted to constant spice presence, their eyes displaying the deep blue within blue of the Eyes of Ibad. This universal saturation has profound effects on Fremen society. Every adult Fremen has enhanced awareness, improved physical capabilities, and access to at least mild prescient abilities. This doesn't mean every Fremen can see the future clearly. They don't all become prophets like Paul Muad'Dib, but they all have better intuition than unenhanced humans, can sense danger before it manifests, can make decisions informed by subtle perceptions that bypass conscious reasoning. This collective enhancement makes the Fremen far more formidable than off-worlders realize. A people where everyone has slightly superhuman abilities becomes effectively superhuman as a group, capable of feats that seem impossible to outsiders. The Fremen's relationship with sandworms is mediated by spice. The worms produce the substance that saturates Fremen bodies and culture, so the Fremen regard them with religious reverence. They call them Shai Hulud, the old man of the desert, and treat them as sacred beings that must be respected and protected. When a Fremen needs to travel long distances across the open desert, they don't use mechanical transportation if they can avoid it. They call a sandworm, using thumpers to attract one, then mount it using maker hooks and ride it. This practice, called worm riding, is dangerous and requires tremendous skill, but it's also a rite of passage, a way of proving yourself worthy of being called Fremen. The process of calling and riding a worm demonstrates the Fremen's intimate knowledge of sandworm behavior. A thumper is planted in the sand, a simple mechanical device that pounds rhythmically, creating vibrations that attract nearby worms. The rider must judge distances and timing carefully, placing the thumper far enough away that they can prepare for the worm's arrival, but close enough that they can reach the worm before it destroys the thumper and submerges again. When the worm surfaces, rising from the sand like a living mountain, the rider must approach it quickly, running across open sand while trying to minimize their own vibrations to avoid attracting additional worms. The rider then uses maker hooks, tools with sharp, curved points, to pry open the segments of the worm's protective scales. This is the crucial moment. Insert the hooks correctly, and you can force segments to open, exposing the soft flesh beneath. The worm, uncomfortable with this exposure, will turn the opened segments away from the sand to protect them. By strategically placing multiple hooks, a skilled rider can force the worm to keep opened segments away from the abrasive sand by staying on the surface and traveling in a specific direction. The rider sits on top of the worm, holding on to the hooks, directing the creature's course by shifting their weight and adjusting which segments are exposed. A worm can carry a rider for hours or even days if properly managed, traveling at speeds exceeding 100 kilometers per hour across the open desert. This gives Fremen mobility that no mechanical vehicle can match. They can cross distances that would take days on foot in a few hours of worm riding. They can travel without leaving tracks that could be followed, since the worm's passage erases all evidence of direction or destination. And they do it all without depending on off-world technology or fuel supplies, using only their knowledge and courage and the desert's own creatures. The Fremen also harvest spice using methods that off-worlders would consider impossibly dangerous. Small teams venture into the deep desert during times when sandworm activity is predictable, locating spice blows through signs that only experienced desert travelers can read. They work quickly, using bags and simple tools to collect the most concentrated melange before worms arrive to investigate. Their harvests are small compared to industrial operations, perhaps a few dozen kilograms per trip rather than tons, but they can access areas that machinery can't reach, and their intimate knowledge of the desert means they rarely lose people to sandworm attacks. The spice they harvest serves multiple purposes beyond consumption. Fremen use spice in manufacturing, creating materials that off-worlders rarely see. Spice fiber can be woven into cloth that's stronger than synthetic materials while remaining flexible and breathable. Spice paper provides a writing surface that's virtually indestructible, resistant to water, heat, and tearing. Spice explosives harness the volatile properties of melange in concentrated form, creating weapons that off-world militaries would envy if they knew such things existed. The Fremen have developed technologies around spice that the rest of the Imperium hasn't imagined. Practical applications born from necessity and intimate familiarity with the substance. Water, or rather the lack of it, shapes Fremen culture as profoundly as spice. On Arrakis, a human body is basically a reservoir of water, walking around in a hostile environment. The Fremen have adapted to extreme water conservation, wearing stillsuits that capture and recycle every drop of moisture their bodies produce. Crying is considered a profound waste of water, reserved only for the most significant occasions. When a Fremen dies, their body's water is extracted and returned to the CH cisterns, given back to the community that sustained them in life. This practice, shocking to off-worlders, makes perfect sense in a culture where water is literally life. The Fremen dream of transforming Arrakis, of bringing water to the surface and creating a green world from the desert. This dream has existed for generations, passed down through CH folklore and religious teachings. They know, intellectually, that terraforming Arrakis would destroy the sandworms and end spice production. But they believe that if humanity can be freed from dependence on spice, if the substance can be made unnecessary through other means, then the transformation would be worth it. They want their children to grow up in a world where water is abundant, where you can go outside without a stillsuit, where crying doesn't mean wasting something precious. The tension between this dream and the reality that spice from their desert sustains the entire Imperium creates complex feelings about their homeland and its place in the larger political structure. When Paul Atreides comes to Arrakis and eventually becomes accepted by the Fremen, adopting the name Muad'Dib, he brings a perspective shaped by both Fremen culture and his own prescient abilities. He sees that the Fremen, with their spice saturation and combat training and religious fervor, are the most formidable fighting force in the Imperium, underestimated and ignored by the great houses who dismiss them as desert primitives. He also sees that their dream of transforming Arrakis is achievable. but that doing so would have consequences extending far beyond the planet itself. The jihad that Paul sees in his visions, the holy war that will spread across the galaxy, is made possible by Fremen warriors who are enhanced by lifelong spice exposure, hardened by the desert, and motivated by religious conviction that makes them willing to die for their cause. The Fremen relationship with spice is ultimately symbiotic in a way that no off-worlder can match. They don't just use spice, they live it, breathe it, incorporate it into their bodies and culture and dreams for the future. When off-worlders consume melange, they're using a drug, a substance external to themselves that provides benefits but remains separate from their identity. When Fremen consume spice, they're participating in their culture, connecting to the desert that defines them, honoring the worms that make their existence possible. The distinction is subtle but profound. The difference between using a tool and being part of an ecology. This deep integration also means that the Fremen understand spice's dangers better than anyone. They've seen what happens when someone overdoses, when consumption becomes excessive, even by Fremen standards. They've watched as some of their own fell into what they call the spice trance, a state where prescience becomes so overwhelming that the individual loses touch with present reality, living entirely in visions of possible futures until they starve or dehydrate because they forget to eat or drink. The Fremen have traditions and practices designed to prevent these outcomes, social structures that monitor individuals for signs of dangerous imbalance, but the risks remain. Spice gives them their strength and culture, but it can also take everything away if treated carelessly. Chapter 9. The Fall and Rise of Empire. The political upheaval triggered by Paul Atreides' rise to power demonstrates how completely spice dominates the Imperium's power structures. When Paul and his Fremen forces seize control of Arrakis, destroying the Harkonnen operations and defeating the Emperor Sardaukar troops, he doesn't need to conquer the rest of the Imperium world by world. He simply threatens to destroy spice production entirely. One man standing in the desert, surrounded by the sandworms he can command through his Fremen allies, holds the entire civilization hostage. The Emperor, the Spacing Guild, the great houses, all must submit because the alternative is the death of their civilization. Paul's threat is credible because his prescience allows him to see that he's capable of following through. He knows that if pushed far enough, if his demands aren't met, he will order the destruction of the sandworms and the transformation of Arrakis into a world where spice can no longer be produced. This isn't bluff or empty rhetoric. Paul has seen the futures where he makes this choice, has experienced in his prescient visions what it feels like to give that order. His enemies, unable to perceive the future as he does, must take the threat seriously because they can sense the absolute conviction behind it. The Spacing Guild finds itself in a particularly difficult position. As the entity most dependent on spice, with thousands of navigators whose lives depend on continuous exposure to melange, they cannot allow Paul to destroy production. But their prescient navigators also perceive that Paul is unique, that his prescience exceeds their own, that he can see paths they cannot. The Guild has always maintained neutrality, refused to take political positions, but now they must negotiate with someone who holds the power to end their existence. They eventually concede to Paul's demands, agreeing to transport his forces wherever needed, effectively placing their monopoly on space travel at his disposal. The Emperor, Shaddam IV, who ruled the Imperium with absolute authority backed by the unbeatable Sardaukar troops and his control of spice production, finds all his power meaningless. Paul defeats his Sardaukar in battle, proving they're not unbeatable. Paul takes Arrakis, eliminating the Emperor's control over spice. And Paul's prescience allows him to outmaneuver every political scheme the Emperor attempts. In the end, Shaddam must abdicate, surrendering his throne to Paul in exchange for the continuation of spice production and the preservation of his own life. The transfer of imperial power happens not through military conquest of the capital or traditional succession, but through simple recognition that the person who controls spice controls everything. The great houses of the Landsraad, powerful entities with their own planets and militaries and commercial interests, discover that none of their traditional power means anything when spice is at stake. They can marshal their forces, can plot and scheme, can try to form alliances against Paul. But ultimately they must bow to the reality that he controls the one substance they all need. Some houses resist longer than others, refusing to accept the new order. And these houses are destroyed not through invasion, but through simple denial of spice. Cut off from Melange, their populations begin to die. Their operations collapse, and they're forced to either submit or face extinction. Paul's reign as emperor is built entirely on this spice monopoly. He doesn't need to station troops on every planet or enforce his will through traditional military occupation. He simply ensures that spice flows only to those who accept his authority and serve his purposes. The Fremen jihad that follows his ascension spreads across the galaxy, but it's made possible not just by Fremen ferocity, but by the simple economic and political reality that resistance means losing access to spice, which means death for billions of addicts and collapse for any resisting civilization. This demonstrates the ultimate expression of spice's political power. Control it, and you control everything. Threaten it, and you threaten everyone. Use it as a weapon, and no traditional military force can stand against you. The entire elaborate structure of the Imperium, with its great houses and guild and Bene Gesserit and emperor, all the political maneuvering and military might and commercial power, becomes irrelevant in the face of one simple fact. Everyone needs spice, and only one planet produces it. Paul's son, Leto II, takes this logic even further in his transformation into the God Emperor. By consuming massive quantities of spice and allowing himself to be covered by sandtrout, Leto transforms himself into a human sandworm hybrid, a being that will live for thousands of years. His body becomes a living storage system for spice, and his prescience allows him to guide humanity along the golden path he perceives, the narrow thread of possibilities that leads to humanity's survival. Leto's reign lasts millennia, an eternity of benevolent tyranny, where one being's vision shapes the destiny of trillions. But Leto's transformation also serves another purpose. By joining with the sandtrout, by becoming part of the sandworm life cycle himself, Leto ensures that spice production can never be controlled by anyone else. He effectively becomes the spice, his body producing melange through the same processes that occur in sandworms. When he eventually dies, his body will break apart, releasing the sandtrout within him to spread across not just Arrakis, but potentially other worlds, diversifying spice production and breaking the monopoly that made Paul's rise to power possible. It's Leto's gift to humanity. Insurance that no one will ever again be able to threaten civilization by controlling access to a substance produced in only one location. The long-term effects of Leto's reign and death reshaped the Imperium fundamentally. Spice production spreads to multiple worlds, ending Arrakis's unique status. The Spacing Guild's monopoly on space travel breaks down as new technologies emerge that don't require navigators. The substance that defined an empire for thousands of years becomes less central to human civilization, no longer the single point of failure that could bring everything crashing down. Humanity is freed from the tyranny of spice, even as most people remain dependent on it for life extension and consciousness expansion. This evolution from monopoly to diversification demonstrates how deeply spice shaped the Imperium's political structures. As long as production was concentrated on a single planet, that planet's control determined who held ultimate power. The Emperor's authority rested on his control of Arrakis. Paul's rise came from seizing that control. Leto's transformation was necessary to break the cycle, to ensure that humanity would never again be held hostage by whoever controlled the spice supply. The political history of the Imperium for thousands of years can be understood as a long process of recognizing, exploiting, and eventually breaking free from dependence on a single substance produced in a single location. Conclusion: the spice that binds. We've traveled far tonight, from the molecular structure of spice melange to the vast political forces it set in motion, from the sandworms that produce it to the navigators it transforms, from its effects on individual consciousness to its role in shaping civilizational destiny. Spice is more than just a drug or a commodity in Frank Herbert's universe. It's a lens through which we can examine fundamental questions about dependency, power, evolution, and the price of transcendence. Herbert created spice as a commentary on oil and the geopolitics of resource control, but he built into it layers of meaning that extend far beyond that initial metaphor. Spice is evolution in a bottle, the promise that consciousness can be expanded, that human limitations can be overcome, that we can become something more than what we were born as. But it's also a trap, a substance so powerfully addictive that freedom becomes impossible once you've tasted it. A tool of control more effective than any weapon or prison. The sandworms that produce spice are themselves a meditation on ecology and interconnection. They're not intelligent in any way we'd recognize. They don't think or plan or create. They simply exist as part of a desert ecosystem millions of years old, producing as a byproduct of their life cycle a substance that happens to be the most valuable thing in the universe to the humans who eventually discovered it. There's no design there, no purpose, just the blind workings of evolution creating something that another species finds incredibly valuable. Yet that random convergence of desert ecology and human neurochemistry reshapes the destiny of billions, proves more powerful than any empire or philosophy or religion. The transformations that spice enables, from the subtle life extension of casual users to the grotesque metamorphosis of Guild Navigators, illustrate a core theme of the Dune series. Evolution doesn't move in one direction toward some ideal form. Enhancement in one area requires sacrifice in others. The navigators gain the ability to see through fold space, to perceive dimensions beyond normal human awareness, but they lose their humanity in the process, becoming beings that can barely communicate with the species they originated from. Paul Atreides gains prescience that makes him effectively omniscient within his sphere of perception, but that knowledge traps him, makes him unable to choose alternatives because he sees too clearly what those alternatives would cost. The economics of spice demonstrate how resource scarcity concentrates power and creates dependencies that transcend any formal political structure. The Imperium has an emperor, a feudal system of great houses, a commercial combine that regulates trade, but all of these structures are secondary to the simple fact of who controls spice production. Traditional military power, political alliances, commercial wealth all become meaningless when one person can threaten to eliminate the substance that everyone depends on. It's a lesson about how material dependency shapes political reality, how control of essential resources translates to control over people regardless of what formal systems exist. The Fremen, with their deep integration of spice into every aspect of their culture, show us what it might mean to truly adapt to a substance rather than simply using it. They don't consume spice, they live it. It's in their air, their food, their water, their rituals, their dreams for the future. They've built a civilization around the desert that produces melange, have made themselves part of its ecology in ways that off-worlders can never match. Their relationship with spice isn't exploitative, it's participatory. They take from the desert, but they also give back. Understand the balance required to maintain the ecosystem that sustains them. Yet even the Fremen dream of escaping spice's control, of transforming their world into something where water is abundant and the harsh desert existence is just a memory. This tension between the benefits spice provides and the desire to be free of dependency runs through the entire Dune saga. Spice gives so much: life extension, enhanced awareness, prescience, the foundation of interstellar civilization. But it also takes everything: your freedom, your ability to survive without it, potentially your humanity, if you consume enough. Is that trade worth it? Herbert doesn't give us a simple answer. He shows us characters making different choices, pursuing different paths, and leaves us to judge for ourselves whether the benefits justify the costs. The water of life represents spice taken to its ultimate expression. Consciousness expansion pushed as far as biology can tolerate. It's the key that unlocks the highest human abilities. But it's also a poison that kills most who dare to consume it. In this, it perfectly embodies the duality at the heart of Herbert's vision. Power always comes at a price. Transcendence requires sacrifice. Evolution, whether natural or forced through chemistry, produces change that isn't always improvement. The ability to see more, to perceive beyond normal limits, doesn't necessarily make you happier or wiser. It just makes you aware of realities that others are blind to, which can be a burden as much as a gift. Frank Herbert's spice melange has become one of science fiction's most iconic creations, inspiring countless imitations and homages. But what makes it enduring isn't just the cool factor of a valuable drug that grants superpowers. It's the depth of thought Herbert put into its implications. The way he traced out the political, economic, ecological, and personal consequences of such a substance existing. Spice isn't just a plot device. It's a fully realized element of world building that illuminates everything it touches, that shapes the society around it in ways both obvious and subtle. In our own world, we face questions about dependency and resource control that echo themes from Dune. We're addicted to fossil fuels, to rare earth elements, to technological systems that few of us understand but all of us depend on. The geopolitics of the 21st century revolve around control of these resources, just as the Imperium's politics revolved around control of spice. We're developing technologies that promise to enhance human capabilities, to extend lifespan, to expand consciousness in ways our ancestors couldn't imagine. And we're grappling with questions about whether these enhancements are worth their costs, whether the future they promise is one we actually want. Herbert wrote Dune in the 1960s, but the questions he explored through spice remain relevant today. What are we willing to sacrifice for enhancement? How do dependencies on substances or technologies shape our freedom? Who benefits when essential resources are concentrated in few hands? Can consciousness expansion make us wise, or does it just reveal how little wisdom we actually possess? These aren't questions with easy answers, and Herbert doesn't pretend to provide them. He gives us instead a rich, detailed exploration of one possible future, where these questions play out on a galactic scale, and invites us to think deeply about what it might mean for our own future. The spice must flow. That's the famous phrase from Dune, repeated like a mantra throughout the story. It's a simple statement of economic and political reality. Spice must continue to be produced and distributed, or civilization collapses. But it's also a more profound observation about dependency and inevitability. Once certain choices are made, once certain substances or technologies or systems become embedded in how society functions, backing away becomes impossible. The flow must continue regardless of the costs, regardless of who suffers, regardless of whether the original choice was wise. We're trapped by our own success, by the very things that elevated us in the first place. Yet Herbert also shows us that even seemingly unbreakable dependencies can eventually be overcome. Leto II's transformation and eventual death breaks the spice monopoly, diversifies production, reduces humanity's vulnerability to anyone controlling the supply. It takes thousands of years and requires one individual to sacrifice his humanity entirely. But it happens. The tyranny of spice, the control it grants over billions of lives, can be broken if someone is willing to pay the price. There's hope in that, even if it's a dark and costly hope. Thank you for joining me on this deep exploration of spice melange, the substance that makes Frank Herbert's Dune universe possible. We've examined its properties and production, its effects on body and mind, the dangerous harvesting process, the extreme transformations it enables, the economic and political systems built around it, and the ways various cultures relate to it. From the molecular to the civilizational, from the personal to the prescient, spice touches everything in Herbert's creation, shapes everything, defines everything. If you enjoyed this journey through the desert planet and the substance it produces, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. There's so much more science fiction to explore together, so many worlds to visit, so many ideas to unpack. Leave a comment letting me know what you'd like to see next. Should we explore more of the Dune universe, diving into the politics of the great houses or the training methods of the Bene Gesserit? Or would you prefer to venture into a different science fiction setting entirely, examining the technologies and societies of other imagined futures? The spice must flow, but so too must the exploration of ideas, the examination of worlds that exist only in imagination, but illuminate truths about the reality we inhabit. Until next time, sleep well, dream deeply, and remember that the most valuable substances in any universe are the ones that expand our understanding of what's possible, for good or ill. Good night.